Us on the bus, riding on flowers, through the flowers. When the passengers make room, whisper bride and groom, that's us on a bus. Two in one seat, love on every detour. You can be sure that I'll show you how it feels to honeymoon on wheels with two in one seat. Slow down, Route 27 is the nearest thing to heaven I know. Speed up, start hitting 60 and my heart will jump and thump. Oh, oh, what a bump. Us on a bus, kisses intimating that we're waiting till it's time to light the lamps. Hit the third camp, that's us on a bus, yeah.
We're on the air, coming to you live from our little adobe home in Los Lunas, New Mexico. It's the Desert Home Companion, where we've got moonshine all day. No, we've got sunshine all day. We got sunshine all day. We've got moonshine all night. And it ain't going to rain no more, no more.
The old man stood out in the storm, his shoes was full of feet. Well, it ain't gonna rain no more, no more, it ain't gonna rain no more. Out of the world, in the old folks tell, it ain't gonna rain no more. Oh, mosquito, he fly high, mosquito, he fly low. If that old mosquito ever lights on me, he ain't gonna fly no more. Oh, it ain't gonna rain no more, no more, it ain't gonna rain no more. Old folk tell it ain't gonna rain no more. Yes, fly away, bud. The butterfly flits on the wings of gold and June bug wings of flame. The bed bug has no wings at all, but it gets there just the same. Well, it ain't gonna rain no more, no more. It ain't gonna rain no more. Out of the world, the old folk tell it ain't gonna rain no more. No more showers. A man laid down by the shore, and by the shore he died. Yeah. Now at the coroner's inquest, they called it suicide. Oh, it ain't gonna rain no more, no more. It ain't gonna rain no more. Out of the world, the old folk tell it ain't gonna rain no more. The thunder roared, it was an awful storm. Yeah. old cow throwed her tail in the air and she ran right through the barn. Well, it ain't gonna rain no more, Lord, it ain't gonna rain no more. Now the world in the old folktale, it ain't gonna rain no more.
Welcome to the Desert Home Companion. Our show tonight is brought to you by the Moscow Ritz Hotel, endorsed by Vladimir Putin. Is great place to sleeping, Putin on the Ritz.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes, or cutaway coat, perfect fits. Dressed up like $1 million trooper, trying mighty hard to look like Gary Cooper.
Okay, folks, welcome to the show. I see some new people, I see some old timers, and just a couple of notes about the show to get started here. Let's see, so please stay muted to keep the background noise quiet, but please do turn your video on so that we can see who you are, if that's at all possible for you. It helps a lot, it helps the performers, it helps the other people to feel more connected. So let's see those shining faces when you get a chance. If you have any technical problems, you can send a chat to Tech Linda, and she'll get the message to me. Please do let me know. We're trying a couple of new things, and hopefully it should work out a little bit better. But if there's a problem, you can let me know. And what else? You can support our guest artists and check out our schedule at cutsbooks.wordpress.com. And there's a tab there for the Desert Home Companion. This evening, we have a special guest artist with us, Neil, who you can see in the window boxes there. Neil is an author, and he is going to read a story just a little bit later on. I mentioned our sponsor for tonight, the Moscow Ritz Hotel. We had to turn down a lot of sponsors for tonight's show because frankly, their marketing ideas were just really terrible. I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here. So we had somebody with a summer camp, and this is how they described it. Kids these days have short attention spans. At our summer camp, your child will learn to focus. They'll learn how to prioritize and how to stick with the task until it's completed. Sign your child up today for our summer concentration camp. Had to turn him down. All right, here was an interesting one. Guys, are you tired of finding yourself in the heat of passion with your gal, only to have to pull on an ice-cold condom, and then it's all downhill from there? New from LL Bean, flannel condoms in all the Scottish tartans and sizes, from Wee Willie to Bonnie Prince Charlie. Also available in flavors, including dryer lint, cotton ball, and gym sock. Flannel condoms, they're like taking a shower in your pajamas. We didn't think too much of that idea either. Here was an announcement that we had to turn down. Mel Johnson and Oma Garcia announced the opening of their new tanning salon. Come get a tan with Mel and Oma. Nope, okay. Here's one, the Romanian Department of Exports cannot understand why their canned fish is doing so poorly in English-speaking countries. There it is. This is a real thing. I actually saw this in Romania. It means carp. But they can't understand why it's not selling well here. Produs in Romania, crap in ule. They just didn't get it. We had the World Tree Foundation. They just wanted us to display their initials, but I just couldn't see doing that, the World Tree Foundation. And finally, last and probably worst of all, Marty's circumcision service, half off. All right, now you know why we were stuck with the Moscow Ritz Hotel as our sponsor for tonight. So, everybody knows that this weekend is Passover and Easter, sort of the Super Bowl of monotheism. And Passover, of course, commemorates God freeing the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and sending them on their way to the Promised Land. And Easter commemorates Jesus' resurrection, rolling back the stone to the cave, stepping out, and if he sees his shadow, there's 6 more weeks of winter. So it's hard to think of Easter. I'm sure when we talk about Easter, the first thing that pops into your mind, the imagery that you cannot avoid, is God's secretary, right? God's secretary, that's what you think of when you think about Easter. So here's a little, you're wondering, what is God's secretary doing? Yes, God does have a secretary. And this will give you a little bit of an idea of God's secretary. And this, I don't know if you remember Shelley Berman, who was famous for doing sit down, not stand up, but sit down. He would cross his legs, and he would do these routines of like this. I watched one today, and he said, for those of you who are not familiar with my routines, you probably don't know what I'm doing. I'm cleaning out the inside of a peanut butter jar. He's actually diving. So, this is in the style of Shelley Berman. Bring. Hello. Oh, hello, sir. How are you? Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Everything, you're okay? Everything's okay. Well, you'd be the one to know. Okay, you'd like me to do what? A review of human history, all of human history? Oh, okay, and you want me to what? To email it to you? Okay. Well, since you asked, I suggest that we divide it into 2 parts, BC and AD. Before Christ and Anno Domini. Anno Domini, no, it's Latin. It means year of our Lord. Now, there's no need to be upset. You're not expected to know everything. Well, actually, you are expected. Yes, I do realize that all of the years are years of our Lord. I don't think they're trying to be disrespectful. It's just their way of keeping track of time. Well, that's a little extreme, isn't it? Destroying the world because of that, after all that you've put into it? Well, that's better. Let's leave it as it is. Oh, okay, so now, as for this research, okay, you want me to review the good and the bad, the highlights, okay. And you want some of the saints to review the 2 reports. Okay, who? Saint Francis of Assisi. Fine, I will. So when I mail you, you want me to send a copy to Assisi. Shall I CC him? Oh, just the BC, not the AD. Okay, then I'll CC Assisi the BC. And what about the AD report? Ah, I see. I'll BCC Assisi the AD and CC Assisi the BC. No, not at all, sir. Who else? Desmond Tutu. Well, shall I CC Tutu the BC too, or just BCC Tutu? All right then. Well, let me see if I have this straight. For the AD, I'll BCC Assisi and Tutu too. And I'll BCC the BC to Tutu 2 and CC Assisi. No, I'm not going to repeat that. What, you're thinking of adding whom? The British Broadcasting Corporation? Oh, dear God. No, I wasn't talking to you. I'll tell you what. How about if I read up the report and you simply proclaim it to all of creation? Yes, I'm sure it'll work. Just have one of the angels blow a horn. Yes, it was exhausting for me too. If I might borrow one of your first expressions, sir, let's call it a day. Well, thank you, and may you bless you too. God's secretary, what else do you think about on Easter? Okay. Are you ready for a little story? Nobody's ready for a little story? Yes. Okay, you ready for a little story? All right. So, you remember being a freshman in high school and you have these assignments and if you're lucky, you do them at the very last minute and get them turned in late. Here's a young man who is writing his assignment and his grammar leaves a lot to be desired. See if you can pinpoint, what is he doing wrong here? The autobiography of my life, which is supposed to be finished by Friday. A freshman essay. I started out small. Unbeknownst to me, I lost both of my parents at the tender age of 5. That's much too young for people to die. After putting me to sleep, they died in a terrible auto accident, no relation to an autobiography, in which no survivors died. Being tiny, not potty trained, and unable to even walk, my grandmother took me into her small cabin. Anybody notice any misplaced modifiers here? Neil's got a little smile on his face. Being tiny, not potty trained, and unable to even walk, my grandmother took me into her small cabin and raised me along with her chickens. Soon afterwards, I got cabin fever and had to lie in bed for 3 weeks. A horrible experience that I will never remember no matter how long I live. Life with Grandma was simple. For breakfast, we usually had eggs, which were quick to make and fast to eat, so that breakfast was over easy. By the age of 6 and at 8 o'clock, it was time for me to start school. I found that school came easily to me, so I didn't have to walk to it, which was a good thing because it was over 2 miles away. In school, I enjoyed both art and philosophy, so I drew many conclusions. I also studied ancient history. I found out that Julius Caesar was always afraid that people were stabbing him in the back, and that made him a nervous Rex. Eventually, William Shakespeare finished him off, along with Romeo and Juliet. In middle school, I met a girl, which was a student who wore skirts and had braids. But, being beautiful and sexy, I was afraid to talk to her. Hopefully by now someone has. In the summer after middle school, my grandma passed away the evening of June 10th by watching game shows on television. On subsequent evenings, she passed away the evening by playing solitaire with cards, and sometimes with me. She taught me how to play Russian roulette, but I always lost. Now that I'm in high school, my aspirations and I are always high, thanks to my new friends Bruno and Tony. Next week, they're going to let me try some of their homemade school spirits. Being awkward, pimply, and ignorant about life, you might enjoy my humble autobiography. Misplaced modifiers. All right. By the way, there's a secret tonight. There's a secret that you need to listen to. At the end of the evening, you'll need to identify a certain type of Cadillac. A certain type of Cadillac. You will need to identify a certain type of Cadillac that was named in tonight's show. So that's the secret word for today. What have we got coming up? I have a feature story coming up here, followed by a video, a little brief story, and then we'll have Neil coming on. So the feature story is called Shorty. It's about a man about 40, and they called him Shorty. Shorty checked the numbers on the doors. 137, 139, 141, there it was. It didn't look like a speakeasy, but then that was the idea. He knocked. An eye looked out through the peephole. From inside, he heard a gruff, "Yeah?" "Lake Michigan," he said. That's the password, but I ain't never seen you before. Who sent you? Shorty swallowed. He never found rejection easy. I'm new in town. Just moved down from Detroit. I met a dame named Mabel. She told me about this place. My name's Shorty. There was a brief, growling silence. Mabel's my woman. Hold on. Shorty sighed. He just wanted to dance, have some fun, get along with folks. He was tired of being chased out of town by bullies and thugs who didn't like his face or his height, or the fact that half the time he couldn't pay for his drinks. It wasn't his fault. He couldn't stand most jobs. He tried to make them work, but sooner or later he'd just have to go out dancing, which meant he'd be out till 3 a.m. and miss work the next morning. Out of a job, out of money, out of friends, and on to a new town. He hoped Chicago would be different, but he couldn't see how. The growl returned. She says she met you. The door opened. Shorty stepped in. He held his hand out to the muscled man towering over him. Shorty! Louie, the man grunted, without offering his hand. Louie nodded toward the bar, and Shorty turned and entered the blue cloud of smoke. All he really wanted to do was dance. That was what made him happy, and maybe meet a few people. By people, he meant ladies. He generally had nothing to say to the men. Few of them liked to dance. Most of them resented a guy who was a good dancer. But the ladies, the dames, they would dance with him. They smiled at him. They loved how he moved them around the floor. He found Mabel, and after exchanging a few pleasantries, he held his hand out to her and nodded toward the dance floor. Her smile disappeared for just an instant as she glanced toward Louie, who was looking the other way. Then she beamed at Shorty, took his hand, and they headed out to the floor. After they had danced a wild jitterbug, Mabel led Shorty back to her table. You're something out on that dance floor, Shorty. You could make it big. Shorty shrugged. Dancing don't pay no bills, sugar. It could, Mabel continued, but not in Chicago. You ought to go out to California. That's where they make all the movies, and movies are full of dancing. I'd run out of dough before I hit Iowa, to say nothing of trying to get discovered in California. Half an hour later, Shorty had danced with almost every woman in the place. The men had noticed. That new guy, the shrimp, I don't like how he's been dancing with my woman, a guy named Nick said to his pals, sitting around a large table at the back of the joint. There were a lot of nods. Yeah, me neither, said Louie said. I say when the place closes, we invite Mr. Shorty to a tour of the train yard and maybe find him a nice freight headed west. Grunts of approval echoed around the table. Mabel was 2 tables away, and in the din of the speakeasy, the words spoken at the round table could easily have gotten lost, but something had told her to keep an eye on the guys. She had spotted the looks on their faces and had tuned into what they were saying. She heard enough to catch the gist. Mabel headed for the back door, and on her way, she tapped the shoulders of a half a dozen of her best friends. They followed her. Listen, she said, when they had exited out into the alley. The guys are going to run Shorty out of town. We need to get him some money so we can get out to California and make it big as a dancer. How much you got? Are you nuts? I don't got any money, said a tall blonde named Sheila. Well, you can flirt, can't you? Mabel said. Go to Nick and tell him you'd like to get a sexy new dress. Bat your eyes at him and tell him it's only $100. By 1 a.m., the women had collected over $500. Mabel stepped over to Shorty and stuffed a small grocery sack filled with bills into his hand. Hide this on yourself somewhere, nobody's going to find it. This'll get you to Hollywood. She made sure Louie wasn't watching and bent down and gave him a little kiss on the cheek. Take care of yourself. Shorty stood there with his mouth open. Thanks, Mabel. Thanks a lot. I'll pay you back. Just watch. I will. A few more drinks and dances, and the people all began to leave. When the place had cleared out, Louie walked over to Shorty. We got a little present for you. A free vacation. Come on quiet now and nobody will get hurt. Eddie? A husky guy with a cigar hanging out of his mouth came over, pulled Shorty's hands behind his back, and tied them with a piece of rope. He shoved a handkerchief into Shorty's mouth and tied it at the back of Shorty's head. 20 minutes later, Shorty found himself inside an empty car of a freight train. By the time he'd wriggled out of the rope and gag, the train was moving. 2 years later, Prohibition had been repealed. Mabel and Louie had bought a fine little house on the south side in a quiet neighborhood. "Are you expecting somebody?" Mabel called out. "No, why?" "There's a real fancy car just pulled up. A big old fishtail Cadillac." Louie came to the picture window to see for himself. The driver got out, some guy in a uniform, and went around to the right passenger door. He opened it. A man in a fancy white suit, wearing a straw hat, got out. He looked familiar. Then the driver went around to the left passenger side and opened that door. Out stepped a man wearing a Hawaiian shirt and casual slacks. He was short, very short. He also looked familiar. In a moment there was a knock on the door. Louie pushed past Mabel and opened it. He looked down. "Ain't you Shorty?" The man beamed and held out his hand. Mabel pushed Louie out of the way. "Shorty, it's you. I seen you in the movies, Shorty. I knew you could do it." She leaned down to give him a hug. Shorty dabbed at his eyes. "I owe it all to you, Mabel. Hey, I brought this for you." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I told you I'd pay you back." Mabel took the envelope cautiously and looked inside. There were only 5 bills, but they were each $1,000. She showed it to Louie. The man in the straw hat cleared his throat. Shorty said, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is Mayor Kelly." "You mean Mayor of Chicago, Mayor Kelly?" Louie stammered. "I understand you're interested in opening a nightclub down here," the mayor said, addressing Louie. "Yes, sir," Louie said. "Having some problems with zoning and financing, though." The mayor smiled. "Not anymore, my friend." He clapped Louie on the back. Louie pulled himself up to his full height and took a breath. He thanked the mayor and then turned to Shorty. "I treated you pretty bad back then," he paused. "You're a lot taller inside than I gave you credit for, Mr. Shorty." Shorty looked up at him. "It took me a while to figure that out myself." He turned to Mabel. "Thanks to you, I've got all the dancing I could ever want. But there's something else." He leaned in toward her. "What?" Mabel said. "Thanks to you, I've got friends." And even Louie smiled.
There was a guy about 40, they called him Shorty, a kind of guy who rambled around until the fellas got together, decided whether they should run Shorty out of town.
Oh, Shorty had to go.
Let me tell you about Shorty.
Had to go.
Cause the fellas got together and decided it was better.
Shorty had to go.
All the guys called a meeting and took a vote, and that was all for Shorty Road. They wanted satisfaction, so they went into action and ran for Shorty out of town.
Oh, Shorty had to go.
Let me tell you about Shorty.
Had to go.
They had to have some action cause they wanted satisfaction.
Oh, Shorty had to go.
They took rag mops, clothes props, ash cans, dish pans, beat poor Shorty all over his head. They ran him muddy
What?
till he was bloody.
No!
I knew poor Shorty was almost dead.
You poor Shorty was almost dead.
They ran him down the railroad track, but he laughed out loud and said,
I'll be back.
all the gals called on their pals to get enough dough to bring Shorty back. They had a rally out in the alley.
Yeah!
They took up dollars in a Kroger sack.
Took up dollars in the Kroger sack.
Now the guys in town shake their heads in pity. Shorty's been elected the mayor of the city. He told them when they ran him down the railroad track, he said, I'll be back in a Cadillac.
Who said Shorty wasn't coming back? Who said Shorty wasn't coming back? Told him when they ran him down the railroad track, he said,
I'll be back in a Cadillac. Fishtail.
That's the story about Shorty. All right. So Neil's coming up in just a few minutes here. But before we get to Neil, here's a very short story about friends. It's called The Man Who Liked a Sheep. Ed Caulfield didn't like people much. That's why he decided to take a job as a shepherd. At first, Ed didn't pay much attention to the sheep. He just kept them from wandering away, which left him a lot of time to listen to his own thoughts. One day, he found himself curious about one particular sheep. Now, that sheep didn't have a name because no sheep have names, and you can't tell one from another anyway. But Ed was definitely more curious about one sheep than the others. So he directed her away from the herd and over toward an old oak tree that cast some pretty good shade, where he sat down and relaxed while the sheep nibbled on whatever sheep like to nibble on, which is pretty much anything. Ed found that he enjoyed the feeling of having some company, just to himself, and they spent a happy half hour there. When he got up to check on the others, he realized he'd never be able to find his sheep again, so he pulled a piece of cloth out of his knapsack and tied it around her neck. Over the next weeks, Ed and his sheep spent many a beautiful afternoon or evening together, doing what he came to think of as communing, just being in the same place together, occasionally sharing some thoughts, usually Ed's. Ed never did give her a name. One warm evening, Ed was feeling particularly thoughtful. You know, he said to her, I just don't know who to be irritated at anymore. Used to be the communists. Bah, she said. That's exactly how I used to feel, Ed concurred. But now it turns out that a lot of their ideas are pretty good. And then there was the homosexuals. Bah, she said. Yep, that was my reaction exactly. But then my niece married another woman who's nice as can be, and they're real happy. So who knows? And nothing used to bug me more than those Lithuanians. Bah, she replied. I know, Ed said. They just stick together and have their own weird way of talking. But then I noticed that you guys all stick together and have your own weird way of talking, and it doesn't bother me a bit. So, what's my problem? That's what I want to know. Why do people bug me so much? The sheep came over and muzzled him on the cheek, and Ed felt a teardrop squeeze out of his eye. He couldn't remember the last time anybody had liked him. That night, while Ed was sound asleep in the shepherd's hammock, the flock found itself wandering through some thick brush, and Ed's sheep's cloth got ripped off. In the morning, Ed went out to check on his sheep, and he couldn't find her. He checked twice, then again. No colorful cloth around anyone's neck. At first, he thought she'd gone. Then the truth hit him. She was there, but he would never know which one she was. He stood there silent for a moment. Then he spoke out. Hey, everybody, I'm leaving. He paused, half expecting at least one of them to protest. Instead, they continued eating the stuff that sheep eat. He started to go, but realized there was something else he wanted to say that was kind of sticking in his throat. Thank you. I think I'm going to go back to my flock. Maybe give it another try. Nobody said, bah. There you go. The man who liked a sheep. So Neil is on. I see he stepped away from his post for a second, maybe to get a little drink. But there he is. Neil is back. So Neil, you've got a story for us, an original story. So feel free to introduce yourself, say a little bit about your story, and I will spotlight you here for everyone.
Sure thing. Thanks.
You're on.
Hey, sorry about that timing. My wife just got home, and anyway, don't worry. It was logistical stuff. Anyway, hi, my name's Neil Holtschulte. I live here in Albuquerque, and by day I teach at CNM, and then in my free time I am a writer. And I have my first novel coming out later this year. It's going to be self-published, and it is going to be completely unlike what I'm going to read tonight, but never mind that. This story here is a short story that I had written ages ago and dug back up and revised it and worked on it with some help from Jay. And I think I'll just launch right in with that. So this is called Kiss Me Not, with a pun in the title there, where not is K-N-O-T. My friend Lynn hid her acne behind a curtain of brown hair. She glared at most people, but greeted me by crossing her eyes and sticking out her tongue. She taught me so much, and I had a lot to learn. There were important skills that the dull stripe of A's on my report card didn't reflect. For instance, it was a fact well known to a middle school student that the measure of a good kisser could be determined by their ability to tie a cherry stem with their tongue or unwrap a starburst in their mouth. Amanda could do both. Amanda wore her blonde hair in a precise cut that fell to her chin. She twitched her head as if saying no, just to swish her hair and draw eyes to herself. She had a splash of freckles and full awareness of her effect on boys. I'd been trying to work up the nerve to speak to her for weeks. Lynn caught me during lunch, my mouth sore, my eyes focused, ignorant of my surroundings. I almost choked when she stepped in front of me and asked, "What are you doing?" "Nothing." I tried to turn away to get the stem out of my mouth in secret. "Oh my God, it's a dumb trick. Give me one of those." She took a cherry with stem from the plastic bag. "I'll show you," she said. "You don't actually tie the stem with your tongue. Just curl it in your mouth, and then when you take it out, pull one end through the loop and bite down to tighten the knot. Your hand does all the real work." She flicked the knotted stem at my forehead and added, "Not like a good kiss." I turned red, my eyes big like a prey animal's. She crossed her eyes at me, then tilted her head and disappeared behind her hair. By the time my heart rate returned to normal a few weeks later, I'd consumed a couple hundred cherries. I could tie a knot in 2 seconds. My mother was plainly curious why I was suddenly obsessed with eating cherries alone in my room. She wore a thoughtful frown. Her thoughts were loud enough to hear through my bedroom wall. "Whatever it is, at least it's not drugs." I kept my secret, pulled it tight into a little knot of courage. Then, before the school dance, I pulled the cherry stem stunt in front of Amanda and asked her to go with me. It happened as if I was watching some other person from a great distance. I stopped breathing. I could barely hear her say, "Okay," over the sound of banshees roosting in my ears and the distracting awareness of my body as a system of sloshing tubes. My buddies couldn't believe it. They punched me on the arm too hard with jealous smiles on their faces. The date of the dance came with a haze of anxious excitement that, I imagine, closely simulated the effects of the illegal substances that occupied my mother's worries. Standing around in the gym, I tried to casually ask Amanda, "Want to dance?" She quirked a stencil-sharp eyebrow, then continued talking to her friends. I overheard something sarcastic about boys, am I right? I wandered away with the afterimage of her cute, disdainful expression branded on my brain. The rest of the evening was spent with my back to a wall, ears ringing with pop music, wishing I was anywhere else. The next Monday, I stopped by Lynn's locker to tell her how lame the dance was. She scowled. Her face was red and tense. I realized belatedly that I'd already started talking about the dance. Words spilled out of me randomly. I said something about how I should have learned the starburst trick too. She said, "You wasted your time. I told you, it's a worthless trick, dumbass." I floundered. Speeding words crashed in a wreck at the back of my throat. She slammed her locker hard enough to turn heads, then pushed past me. I stared dumbly as the locker door failed to latch, swung outward. Taped to the inside of the flimsy metal cage was my school picture, wallet-sized. She'd drawn hearts around my head. Lynn, she taught me so much.
Wonderful, Neil. Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thank you.
I'll remove the spotlight here. It's at the end of the show, I didn't mention, most of you know that at the end of the show, after the final video and credits, we stick around and you have a chance to talk to Neil and ask him questions and find out more about his writing. And I hope that everyone will have a chance to do that. Let's see here. Gallery view, there we go. So I've got a few more things for you. We have a brief little story coming up here. We have a visit by a local blues musician. We've got a little musical interlude, and then we have a final feature story at the end before we close. So first of all, this next little piece came from a dream that I had. I won't talk about it now, but I'll talk about it after the show is over. And it's called How Mickey Ended Up in Hell. Mickey Kane is standing at the gates of hell, and the demon on duty is looking up his record. The demon says, "You were doing pretty good up until recently. I'm curious to hear what happened to land you here." Mickey looks at his feet for a second and says, "It all started at a card game." Mickey continues, "So, it's O'Malley's turn, and he raises $10. I call, and I turn to Kozlowski on my left. 'Ed,' I says, 'what do you got?' Ed says, 'I got nothing.' I says, 'Don't start up with me. You got nothing, or you don't got nothing. Which is it?' And I give him a little shove to show him I mean business. Ed pulls back and pops me twice, and now I got a bloody nose and the beginning of a black eye. I'm not feeling too good, and I'm out of dough anyways, so I go home. I walk in, and the wife says, 'What happened to you?' I says, 'Nothing.' She says, 'Don't give me that.' So I explain the whole thing to her, and she gives me her usual look. I says, 'I'm feeling crummy. How about some lovin' tonight?' She says, 'You're getting nothing from me.' 'Oh, no,' I say. 'Don't you start up with me now.' I'm right in her face. 'I'm getting nothing, or I ain't getting nothing. Which is it?' I shouldn't have said this when she was so close to the stove, because she grabs the skillet and conks me a good one on the skull. I says, 'I ain't feeling too great. I'm going out for some air.' I walk down the street and into the neighborhood bar, suddenly remembering I got no money. There's Tony the loan shark, so I says to him, 'Tony, spot me $10 so I can get something to drink.' Tony says, 'You owe me $1,000 already. From me, you're getting nothing.' I grab him by the collar. 'Don't you start up with me too, 'cause I've had it. I'm getting nothing, or I ain't getting nothing. Which is it?' I feel something press against my guts and hear a loud noise. And suddenly I'm standing in front of St. Peter. St. Peter says, 'You're early, Mickey.' I says, 'Tell me about it.' Peter's looking through his books to see if I get in, and I'm getting nervous. 'Am I okay?' I says. Without looking up, Peter says, 'Looks like you haven't done nothing wrong.' At this point, I can't take any more. I counter him and say, 'Am I going to have to put up with this for eternity? I done nothing wrong, or I ain't done nothing wrong. Which is it?' I'm shouting it by now and shaking his skinny head. St. Peter pulls this lever, a trapdoor opens, and here I am. The demon nods. Well, Mickey, you're welcome here. Come on in. And he opens the gate. Mickey walks in, looking around and smiling. I'm glad that's finally settled. Hey, when do I get to meet the big guy? The demon closes the gate behind them. The devil? You already have. And he taps Mickey on the left shoulder. Mickey looks over, and sure enough, there's a small red devil sitting on his shoulder right next to his ear. Mickey thinks for a minute. I get it now. So you're the one that's done all this to me. The devil starts laughing and he can't stop. He's holding his stomach and gasping for air. When he finally catches his breath, he stands up on that shoulder. Don't look at me, he says. Trying hard not to start laughing again, he stabs Mickey's shoulder with his pitchfork. I ain't done nothing. All right. Now, how about a little musical interlude? So, let's see. Let me look at my notes here so I get this right. We're very honored to have with us tonight a great blues musician in the tradition of artists like Blind Lemon Jefferson and others. And as you may have noticed, many blues musicians have names like Blind Lemon Jefferson that start out with a disability, blind, contain a fruit, such as lemon, and end with the name of a president, like Jefferson. So, in that tradition, please give a warm welcome to our own local blues artist, Hyperactive Persimmon Coolidge. Hyperactive? Okay, gotta adjust this thing here. Gotta adjust this thing so people can hear me. Gotta adjust this thing. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. That ain't it. That ain't it. All right. I'm gonna sing a blues song. It's called Iowa City Blues. Went down to Iowa City, spent the whole night fiddling. Yeah, went down to Iowa City, spent that whole darn night in the Boulevard room fiddling. I should have been sleeping, but I forgot to take my Ritalin. That's it. Oh wait, I got one more. I got one more. Okay. Fell in love with Mother Teresa. She found me sleeping on a pile of trash. Yeah, I fell in love with Mother Teresa. She found me out there sleeping on a pile of trash. But she didn't want to kiss me, 'cause she didn't like my mustache. That's it. Okay. All right, I'm out of here. All right. All right, thank you. Let's have a big hand for Hyperactive Persimmon Coolidge. All right. Now, that wasn't much of a musical interlude, but this is.
Everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, and a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, a time of peace, and a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time for every purpose under heaven.
That was the Seekers. I don't know if you remember the Seekers. We may have more of them next time. So we're now coming to the final story of the evening. When this story is over, please, we'll have the closing credits, and hope that you will stick around afterwards to visit a little bit. And this final story is called As Time Goes By. Peabody here. As you know, being the world's most intelligent canine comes with certain responsibilities, not the least of which involve my boy Sherman. It was a somewhat drizzly day, and I was cozily ensconced in my easy chair, listening to the soundtrack from Casablanca and reading a book of Ogden Nash poetry when my boy, Sherman, came bounding up and wanted me to throw a tennis ball for him to fetch. "Okay, Sherman," I said, "but only 5 times, and please try not to drool on it." If I didn't place a limit on it, Sherman could play fetch all day. As usual, Sherman successfully retrieved all of my best throws. I announced the 5th throw as the final one and pitched. Strangely, instead of speeding toward Sherman's head as intended, the ball made its way sluggishly through the air in a slow arc. Sherman's response was equally strange, a leap that had been reduced to slow motion. "Mr. Peabody, I can hardly move," Sherman said, having snatched the ball with one hand. "What's going on?" I reflected for a moment. "Time is in danger, Sherman. Quickly to the Wayback Machine while we can still move." Sherman and I fought our way to the Wayback, my time-traveling invention. I slammed the door and set the Wayback to the dawn of time, hoping we weren't already too late. The Wayback made its customary humming and whirring noises, and when it came to a rest, I opened the door. In front of us was a garden of unimaginable beauty. We were in a grassy clearing surrounded by trees of all types. Fruit abounded, and every manner of animal scampered here and there. At the edge of the clearing there was a man. He was completely naked except for a strategically placed fig leaf, staring into space with a lost and melancholy expression. I motioned for Sherman to follow me. When we were standing directly in front of him, he finally noticed us and stared rather uncomprehendingly back and forth between the two of us. I took it upon myself to break the ice. "You are Adam, I presume?" He nodded. "Tell me, Adam, what are you doing?" He sighed and scratched his stubbly chin. "I guess I'm watching the time go by." "Aha! That's what I was afraid of," I said. "In fact, what you are actually doing is killing time. And if you don't stop, it's going to be rather bad for the rest of us who will never exist." He stared at me as though I had been lecturing on 3rd century Ming poetry, and believe me, I know that look from personal experience. "Let me put it this way," I said. "Why don't you get up and do something productive?" I looked around. "And, by the way, where is Eve, anyway?" "Eve? You mean that big thing that walks around on 2 legs? "In case you haven't noticed," I said, "you also walk on 2 legs. The two of you are meant to be together, so you can go forth and multiply, etc. Have you even met her yet?" "The first time I noticed her, she tried to kiss me. I ran away as fast as I could. One thing I've learned is not to hang out with the big animals. They're dangerous. I like the little animals. What are you guys, squirrels?" I'm confident that Sherman was flattered by this, but I personally had never been so insulted in my life. I bit my tongue, as it were, and said, "That's not important. Why were you afraid of Eve's kiss?" "I don't know, I just had this feeling that it would change things. Like everything I've learned wouldn't apply anymore." "Ah," I said, "take this advice, Adam. You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss, no matter where it comes from. Yes, minor things change, but the fundamental things apply as time goes by." He seemed to consider this seriously and then said, "Huh?" I tried to make it even simpler. Go find Eve, introduce yourself, try to be friends with her. "What do I say?" Start with, "Madam, I'm Adam." She'll take it from there. I advised him and pointed in the direction of a large apple tree in the distance. Adam headed off into the forest, while Sherman and I took a deep breath and crossed our fingers. Sherman turned to me. "I sure hope this works, Mr. Peabody. Why did you tell him to say, 'Madam, I'm Adam,' anyway?" "Why, Sherman, I just created the world's first palindrome. Try saying it backwards." He did, and the look on his face was so, shall I say, endearing that I had no choice but to pat him briefly on the head. 10 minutes later, Adam reappeared looking somewhat distraught. "How did it go?" I asked him, hopefully. "It started out okay until she sat down next to me. Suddenly she got a funny look on her face and started scratching herself all over. Then she pushed me away and got up and ran off." "Come here," I said. He did, and I examined him. I said, "Go jump in the lake." "Same to you, pal." No, I mean go jump in the lake and bathe yourself there." I reached into my pouch and pulled out one of those little hotel travel bars of soap. "Take this and rub it on yourself. And don't forget your hair." Fortunately for humanity, he did as he was told. Once he was done, dried off, groomed, and refigged, I sent him back to find Eve. This time he returned 2 hours later, arm in arm with his newfound friend. It was clear that history would now return to its predestined course, and humanity and time were saved. I spoke. "Well, I'm sure you 2 kids have a lot to do, so Sherman and I will leave you now. Best of luck, and don't forget to domesticate some of the wolves. Say goodbye, Sherman, and please put that stick down. We have plenty of sticks at home. Goodbye, Adam and Eve, Sherman squeaked in his most cheerful voice. We climbed aboard the Wayback, which obediently took us back to our own time and my apartment. Gosh, Mr. Peabody, you saved the day again. Not just the day, Sherman, all of time. Yeah, but say, how did you know that Adam needed a bath in order to be friends with Eve? I replied without hesitation. Instinct, and so did Adam. And, of course, this helped. I handed Sherman the book of Ogden Nash poems open to the appropriate page, the world's shortest and first poem. Sherman read, Fleas, Adam had 'em. Now I get it. Wow, Mr. Peabody, you've sure given the world a great gift today. I winked. Of course, Sherman. Everyone knows there's no present like the time. And now the final music and credits. Please stay around and we'll have a chance to visit afterwards.
You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Moonlight and love songs are never out of date. Hearts full of passion, jealousy, and hate. Woman needs man, and man must have his mate that no one can deny. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by. Moonlight and love songs are never out of date. Hearts full of passion, jealousy, and hate. Woman needs man, and man must have its mate that no one can deny. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome love